I hope you've had a chance to look over all of the material that we're going to be using this semester. Have you had a chance to look over the syllabus and really give it a good read over? Um, you should also look at print out review sheet 1. Your test will come from review sheet 1. So make sure you have that at your disposal. And you keep it with you as you're doing your reading and going through these lectures, because it will be a big help to you to understand what material I think is important in the semester. Before we jump into our investigation of micro, I'd like to do a little review of macroeconomics. Some of you may have had macro already. I'm hoping most of you have. But some of you may not have. So it just is good for us to take a quick review of some micro terms and some graphs so that we're all heading, or let's say we're all starting from the same direction. First, let's just do a review. Economics, remember, is the science that studies the allocation of scarce resources. That's what everything that economics is about. No matter whether it's macro or micro, or whether it's international, or whether it's sports economics, um, any type of economic study is trying to figure out how we use the resources that we have in the best way possible. Now, many of you may remember, excuse me, that when we look at economics, when we look at resources, we're looking at three different types of resources. We look at land, we look at labor, and we look at capital. Labor is people, you and me. Land is any naturally occurring resource. And finally, capital is any manufactured good used to make something else. Now, I want to point out the definition of capital because it does differ from a finance or accounting definition. So again, keep in mind that capital is a manufactured good used to make something else. All right. All right. Now, when we look at economics, there are two major subdivisions of economics. Macroeconomics, which looks at the economy as a whole. How do each of the individual players fit together? It's kind of like a big jigsaw puzzle. How does everything fit together? And that's what I'm hoping most of you already have had macro, because that just helps us move forward with some of the ways that an economist thinks and some of the foundations. If you haven't had macro, please let me know that so that I can be prepared possibly to help you out on the side with some of the stuff. Whether you've had macro or not, if there's some things that you feel that I'm assuming that you don't quite get, make sure you reach out to me and let me know. All right, this semester we're going to be looking at microeconomics. Now, micro is the study of how individuals make decisions. For example, when we're talking about how does Ahmed decide how much water to buy, or how does Sally decide how much water to produce? Whether from the producer perspective or the consumer perspective, it is how does the individual make the decision? One of the things you should remember from macro is that economists use a lot of graphs to represent what's happening in the economy. The economy is really big. It's kind of hard for us to wrap our brains around. So we draw graphs and we use those as snapshots of what's going on in the economy. Now, one of the first graphs you should have looked at in macro was a production possibility curve. Sometimes it's called a production possibility frontier. Regardless, it's the same thing. Now, when we draw a production possibility curve, what we're showing are various combinations of two goods. In this case, I'm looking at shoes and backpacks. Don't ask me why, it was just the two things that came to my mind when I was doing this slide. Pick any two goods. But the key thing here is it's in goods space. We're measuring the amount of shoes along the vertical axis. We're measuring the amount of backpacks along the horizontal axis. Now, we make assumptions about the economy when we draw graphs. It's necessary because the economy is too complex. We have to make simplifying assumptions. For a production possibility curve, we have to assume that there is fixed resources, that we have a fixed technology, that we have full employment, and we only produce two goods. By fixed resources, we mean just that. We have a limited amount of resources. Probably the most realistic assumption that we make when drawing this graph. Fixed technology, not very realistic, but what we assume is there's only one way to make any good. Why do we assume there's only one way to make the good? Again, it's a simplifying assumption. We'll see momentarily what happens when we violate that assumption. Full employment simply means we use all of the resources we have up. When an economist talks about full employment, we're not just talking about people, we're talking about everything. Land and capital and labor are all being used. Because if everything's being used, then we get the production possibility curve, which is this black curve here. It bows outward from the origin. And the production possibility curve represents the maximum combination of two goods we can produce, given the assumptions that we've talked about. All right, so we start with this production possibility curve, with this, that's the most our economy can produce. If we change an assumption, then that curve is going to change. For example, if, as the blue here represents, if we come up with a new technology to make backpacks, well, that's going to allow us to make backpacks more efficiently, right? We get more. But backpack technology will have no effect on shoe production. So in this case, our new technology is going to, if we're producing only shoes, have no impact on shoe production. But it's going to then, as we make more backpacks, you're going to see a bigger increase in society. So change in technology is simply moving along the axis of the good that you're getting more of, but staying the same with the other. If we go back to our original curve, that's our default curve, and say, okay, what happens if we have more resources? We have more land, more labor, more capital. Well, obviously, since we use land, labor, and capital to produce both shoes and backpacks, we now get more of both goods. So you see, going from the black curve to the red curve here, we're going out along both axes. So this shift of the curve outward on both axes represents economic growth. Something that we want to see happen. We want economic growth. We want more stuff. The problem is we can't get more resources, right? Back in the 17 and 1800s, when we could have colonization, you could get colonies and get their resources. But nowadays, how are we getting more resources? Well, basically, we are getting more stuff because of technological change. We are using the resources we have more efficiently by coming up with better ways to use what we have. So we may see a technological change in backpack, but then what happens if we have a technological change in shoe production? We could then go out along the shoe axis, but stay here on the backpack axis. So we need economic growth. We need more stuff, but we can't always get new resources to do it. Now, if we go back to the black curve, excuse me, which is our original production possibility curve, remember, being on that curve is where we want to be. We don't want any unemployment. We want to use all of our resources. Well, can you think of a time when we wouldn't want to use all of our resources? Just like you probably shouldn't be spending all of your money every month when you get paid, right? Let me sound like your mother. Why don't you think maybe you should save a little money? Put a little aside for a rainy day, just in case your car needs to get repaired or something happens. It's good to have a savings account, not to use all of your money. Same logic for the economy. Should we be saving some of our resources in case we need them? All right. And this is a problem for economists because we really want to be on our production possibility curve. We want to have as much stuff as we possibly can. Now, there's a difference in where you are as far as unemployment. First of all, any point below the black curve here represents unemployment. It's a combination of two goods that puts us below our maximum. Right? So the X that I put on this graph to represent unemployment, that's a pretty big decrease from the black curve to this X here. That's a pretty big difference. That's a pretty bad unemployment. Now, if I had put the X somewhere up here, that wouldn't be so bad, right? We're just a little below the curve. So that's something as an economy, as a society, we need to discuss. How much unemployment are we willing to have? This discussion of unemployment brings up a very important point that you're going to need to keep in mind for the rest of the semester. There are many times when economic theory tells us one thing. And so as an economist, put on your economist thinking hat, as an economist, you are supposed to think one way. You should be on the production possibility curve, producing the maximum amount, right? But on the other hand, as a member of a society who's looking beyond just economic theory, there may be other choices. Economics needs to tell you what could be. If you pursue this line of inquiry, what could happen? You may choose to say, okay, I'm all right with that. I understand that could happen, but I'm still going to let it happen. All right, let's stop here and we're going to pursue a little more overview in the next lecture. So we're done for now. Go to lecture number 2. Thanks. Bye-bye.